morning or afternoon class. I wanted to give you one more lecture this week on your stakeholder as you start to narrow in a little bit on this topic for the rhetorical analysis essay. So today we're going to talk about the stakeholder's voice, or where to find and how to analyze text derived from your stakeholder. So this essay that you're writing is part of the collaborative project. And one way to think about this is that you are trying to get a sense of one segment of the audience that your website, your issue-oriented website, the collaborative issue-oriented website that you will put together with your team, you want to get a sense of one segment of the audience that will pay attention. And so what we're going to do is analyze those people that are invested in this debate. Because with the issue-oriented website, you are going to enter that debate. And so I want you to know what other people are saying about this, more than just, oh, some people are pro and some people are con. I want you to get a sense of the overall, like how they're making their points and what exactly their arguments are, their claims, okay, and that sort of thing. So today I want to talk a little bit about how to make sure you have a good stakeholder and where to find their material, or where to find their voice, if you will, and then how do we start tearing that apart and how do we start analyzing it. So when you look at this assignment, you're looking at trying to get a sense of, in 1,800 words, okay, how your stakeholder talks about the controversy. Not just what their position is or where they enter the public debate. You want to know those things, but you want to talk about how they talk about it, because you're going to use similar tactics in your issue-oriented website depending on what you want to say, or rather depending on what your team wants to say. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to keep talking about the Bechdel test, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Usually I say this in the lecture and nobody sends me questions, and I find out later on that you guys are a little bit confused. I am happy to answer any questions you might have about this lecture. And if you want to talk to me in office hours, I'm happy to do that as well. My office hours, again, are on Monday from noon to 2:30, and on Wednesday from, what did I say, 3:30 to 5? No, 3 to 5:30. Sorry about that. So take a look at this, and if you have any questions, please let me know. You want to make sure you get a good stakeholder and that you have a sense of their text by at least the middle of next week. Okay, so by at least Wednesday, the first Wednesday in October. Okay, so the rhetorical analysis essay, you're asked to look at principal stakeholders, not just any stakeholder, but principal stakeholders. There are many stakeholders in the public debate, all right, but there are fewer primary or principal stakeholders. Those who have spoken up consistently about a topic, right, that have spoken up consistently. So you want people that are involved in the debate, not people that are, vaguely oriented towards it. So for instance, if you're dealing with police discrimination, talking about the police officers is great, but that's a really large group to try to get a sense of. So why not focus on those people that are speaking up for the police officers? So maybe the Fraternal Order of Police and what they have to say about it, or the different police chiefs from areas that have had to deal with discrimination charges. So like the Chicago Chief of Police, or the Memphis Chief of Police, or the Dallas Chief of Police. So looking at what they have had to say about it, because they're speaking consistently about this from the point of view of the police officers. It's not just, oh, the police officers are a stakeholder, which they are, but you want to look at the principal stakeholders are the ones that are really involved in the debate. So very specific groups or organizations and very specific people sometimes. All right, so you could talk about a specific person that's constantly going on and on about this. So if we're talking about vaccinations, you have Jenny McCarthy. She's an actress who has kind of turned her whole life over to a lot of discussion about vaccinations and the problems with vaccinations. And so she's a huge stakeholder in that argument. Why? Well, I mean, or why she is convinced that her son's autism is linked to vaccinations. She's gotten fired from talk shows because she can't stop talking about this issue. She's written several books on it. So you have a lot of stuff to go for if you look at Jenny McCarthy. If I just look at parents that are concerned about vaccinations, then this is really large group. I don't know what to do with it. It's hard to get a sense of it. So think about this in terms of narrowing in on a specific person or a specific organization, okay? Instead of talking about it in large terms, all right? You want those who are profoundly affected by the topic, those that will be changed by it, okay? And those who are acutely aware of their perspective, their role in the debate. These are people that know they're talking about a controversy or they're talking about a debate. Now, if you're talking about electronic textbooks or e-textbooks and print textbooks, it's not as heated of a debate, but it is some people that know that they are fighting against printed texts, or they know that they are trying to make room for e-text in the classroom or whatever. So they know they're involved in the debate or in the controversy, even if it's not a huge heated thing. Okay. So I talked about this last lecture, but if you're looking at this, one way to make sure that you are focusing in is as a team, focus your topic down a little bit more. Okay, so instead of in last lecture I talked about women in media. Well, that's a huge thing. So maybe I want to focus instead on a smaller debate within that larger controversy. And that smaller debate, and what I chose was the Bechdel test, which is that test that says films that do a good job of showing women, representing women, will follow 3 rules. Rule number 1, there are 2 women. Okay, more than 1 woman. And 2, they talk to each other. Okay, and then 3, they talk to each other about things other than boys. All right, or marriage or whatever like that. So these are things that the Bechdel test. Well, it started a lot of debate about whether or not that's a valid way of assessing whether a movie is fair or gender equal. Okay, so I want to look at that in more detail, and so I'm going to look at these stakeholders. Okay, this is still might seem like a very broad thing, but I'm still focused in enough, so I'm talking about a very specific reaction, and it makes it easier, even though I'm talking about audiences, it makes it easier for me to talk about it in terms of fine text that someone will have written about Frozen instead of just texts about women in movies. All right. So if you want some more example of this or more detail on this, go look at the last lecture again. All right. So just to focus in for the sake of this, I'm going to pretend like I'm writing a rhetorical analysis on the film critics that looked at the Bechdel test and are trying to figure out if the Bechdel test is worthwhile as a gauge of gender equality. So if you remember last time I talked about the Sphinx Theater Group, it's actually the theater company, and my mistake on that one. Based out of London, you have Walt Hickey, who is a culture writer for 538.com, which is a very statistical oriented website. They do a lot of stuff with sports. In fact, they're owned by ESPN, and a lot of stuff with the presidential, well, with any election, not just the presidential election. And then Andy Zeisler. The thing that I was thinking of was We Were Feminists Once, which is a collection of essays, but Andy is a film critic for the Los Angeles Times. So if I'm going to look at these guys and I want to talk about stakeholders that are film critics, I could, okay, you can look at all of these things and see how they're going together. But each one of them is also a stakeholder in their own right. So if you want to spend your 1,800 words looking at one author, one commentator, one person, that is perfectly fine. If you kind of want to look at a group, make sure it's a small group, but you can look at a group of texts that are related, of all people that share that same perspective. Okay, these are all film critics talking about the Bechdel test, so they all share a certain perspective. And so what I could do is I could look at, and these are just some of the texts, okay, and it might be hard to see, but it's not a big deal. You have the Sphinx, and I'm going to go into more detail about this in a little bit. The Sphinx Theater Company's website. that is a text written by this group to kind of give a sense of where their stance is on as a theater group, but it also has stuff on gender equality and their stance towards that. Okay, I could look at, and this is just from 538. I just did a quick search on Walt Hickey, and these are just the top 4 articles that came up that he has written that have to do with the Bechdel test. Okay, he's written a lot more, so I could look at several different articles by this one author and get a sense of what his take on the controversy is, and that's a stakeholder analysis. That's a rhetorical analysis that is very easily done. Or I could look, and this is one article from Andy Zeisler, but you could see, what her kind of take is, and then maybe I just look at that one article. It'd probably be better to get a greater sense of where people stand, especially since this is not specifically about the Bechdel test. This article, it's about Ghostbusters, but it's still an interesting article, and one that is worthy of like delving into a little bit more. So if I'm doing stakeholder analysis, and I asked you guys to do this last time, or to think about this last time, what does the stakeholder value? Okay, what is its priorities? Okay, what does it want? What does it fear? Okay, how will this situation impact the stakeholder? Okay, there are a lot of different ways to look at this, but this is a useful way to kind of start your stakeholder analysis. And if you cannot answer any of these questions, try to narrow in a little bit more. Or if all of your answers are kind of qualified, all right, how will this situation impact the stakeholder? Well, maybe they'll be impacted, maybe they won't. Or if I'm looking at what kind of text does the stakeholder use to make his case or her case, sometimes they use this, sometimes they use that. It's fine to have qualified answers, but if everything is qualified, I would again urge you to kind of narrow in on more specific group. Okay. So what we're going to talk about more is, and I mentioned this just a second ago, I'm going to look at the Sphinx Theater Company a little bit more. But when you're doing a rhetorical analysis, you're trying to get a sense of the rhetorical situation from which a group, or from which an argument is being made. And then you're going to use that to kind of understand the claims being made and how they're making those claims. So what you want to do first is you want to get a sense of where this voice, or the stakeholder's voice, is coming from. So what's the situation out of which this person is entering the debate, or out of which this person is speaking. Okay. So, I mean, this seems like a lot to go into, but the easiest thing to do is to just take it one by one. Okay. Don't try to understand everything at once. Take a look at it one by one and see if that helps. So for instance, well, I'll go ahead and do that, but I want to start with just a look at the Sphinx website. So I'm going to jump over to this real quick. So you can see, hopefully, it's not working so well. I'll just go back to the slides. If you wanted to check it out, just do a Google search for Sphinx Theater Company, and you can see kind of the slideshow that they have of some of their productions, and you can tool around a little bit, see what's going on with them. So we're going to take a look at this, because if I'm looking at doing a rhetorical analysis, just to go back here, of the Sphinx Theater Company, and I want to understand who they are and what kind of text the stakeholders use, then the first place to start is maybe their personal website. I mean, I don't know where else to start. Why not start there? So I'm going to go to their website and kind of get a sense of who they are based off of that. All right. So for instance, looking at this, what can this still, this is the first one that comes up. This is what they want you to see first on their website. What can this tell me about the kind of theater company it is? Well, I can tell you one thing. It's a pretty typical modern theater company in terms in modern facing, not in terms of like classical theater, like Shakespeare and that sort of thing. So I can see that in the way that they're depicting themselves and using wires and that sort of stuff. I can also see women taking center stage, and while there are men, so it's not an all-woman company, all right, it's still primarily women. And if they say that on the front page, women taking center stage as their slogan, then what's that going to tell me about the kind of company this is, or the kind of stakeholder this is? is going to tell me that even if they're talking about equality, they're going to be pushing forward women at center stage or to take center stage. So maybe we're dealing with less of a gender equality group, and maybe we're dealing more with a feminist group in terms of pushing forward positive depictions of women or powerful depictions of women instead of trying to equal out. Okay, so that's one thing I've learned just from looking at the first page, like the top of the first page. Even I haven't even looked at the news that they're listing and that sort of thing. And I know I'm more practiced at this. I'm willing to accept that. But these are things that you can start with as far as notes, and then you go back through and you say, well, that doesn't make so much sense now that I've looked a little bit deeper, or this is my first impression. Let's see where else this goes. And that's all it takes, is trying to ask questions of the text and try to get a sense of what's going on. So one thing that I will want to do if I'm looking at this group is I'm going to want to know kind of what's going on with the rhetorical situation. So the first place to start is exigence. Why? Because without exigence, there is no rhetorical situation. So without a reason, there's nothing there. Without a reason for the rhetorical appeal to be made or for the argument to be made, then why is there an argument at all? Okay, so if I'm looking at exigence, I'm going to be looking at these kinds of questions. Why is this argument being made? What prompted this? Is the purpose obvious or hidden? Why? Okay, is there more than one purpose behind this argument appeal? What are some secondary purposes? So here, if I go back to the front page, is the purpose hidden? Not really. Not really at all. I mean, we have women taking center stage. That's front page, and the pictures change, but that stays the same. You can see it on an earlier slide. It still says this, but there's a different picture here. All right, so this is not hidden at all. The main purpose behind the theater company is very well understood. It's also in the name, okay? Sphinx with an X. Well, if you know anything from your biology courses, you'll know that women have 2 X chromosomes and men have an X and a Y. So to prominently feature the X in the design of their company is one thing. And the Sphinx is a mythical creature with the head of a woman. Okay, so there's more of this kind of going along. All right, it's building towards this idea of a feminist theater group, which is okay. I mean, I'm not trying to judge them by using the term feminist. Sometimes that has a negative connotation to it. Do not take that to mean anything. I mean only that we're talking about this in terms of favoring women, powerful and beneficial depictions of women instead of trying to work on the equality thing, which is what a lot of the Bechdel people will push for. So just wanted to mention that. But so the purpose is why is this argument being made? Well, you might not think that this is an argument. It's just a group, okay? But one thing to think about is not just what the group is, but what are they doing when they enter into the controversy or the debate that you're looking at. So if we're talking about women's depiction in media and film, well, this is a theater group. They might not have much to say about film, but they'd have a lot to say about women in media because the stage is a medium. So I'm going to look at this and say, okay, what is their argument? Why are they making this argument? Okay, well, they're making, it seems to me, on first look, that this group is making this argument because they want to push forward positive depictions of women, and instead of relying on the tradition where men get the best roles and men are put center stage, if you will. All right. Are there secondary or other purposes? I'm sure there are. I mean, I'm going to talk about one of them, but this is a theater group. They need to make money. That's one of the purposes. So I might look at their argument and think about it in terms of that context, and I'll talk about that later, of it's a theater company, it's trying to make money, so is this a political move? Yes. Is it also a financial move? Maybe. Okay, so there might be more than one purpose. That doesn't mean it's wrong. That doesn't mean it's not a good stakeholder position. That means you have a better sense of where they are coming from. So ask yourself if there are other purposes behind this. Are they trying to sell books? Well, that's something. Are they trying to increase their political power? Well, that's something. Okay. So one thing that I can do, and this is just the about page or from the about page, and to understand their exigence is to look into the history or what they say about their history. Okay, so I can look at this as founded as the Women's Theater Group in 1973. Okay, it was renamed in 1990, so it was the Women's Theater Group. Then they renamed it. Well, I might look at that and say, well, why rename it? Why'd they rename it in 1990? Is it to get more attention because Sphinx is an easier way of is a quicker name to remember, or is it because in 1990 people were worried about PC and so more so, and so the Women's Theater Group seemed like a problematic thing for people to come and see their stories because it seems like it's too political. So Sphinx is a little less political. Are they trying to hide their purpose? Okay. So what I'm doing and I'm looking at this is I'm looking at the word choice. Well, this is from them. They are trying to tell me about themselves. So I'm trying to look at this word choice as a way to understand the purpose behind the group. So I want to understand the exigence. So I'm going to look at this and try to understand that. Okay. I could also look at this, because it's about the Sphinx Theater, as a way to understand the rhetor or to understand the group, the stakeholder. Okay, so I can understand where they're coming from, but I can also understand, um, who makes up this group. Okay, who is making a claim about this debate? Who is your stakeholder? Well, that's a simple question or a simple answer, but it also involves a lot more detail than just who is your stakeholder? The Sphinx Theater Group. Well, give me some more. Who is the Sphinx Theater Group? Okay. Why do they care about this topic? Okay. How are they impacted by this debate? All right. So if the debate about the Bechdel test comes out and it says, well, this is stupid because women-centered stories and movies and plays and that sort of thing don't make any money. So why would we ever try to change the movie industry so that women were made first? Because they never make any money. All right, and that's an argument that actually happens with the Bechdel test. A lot of studios will say, well, we'd like to be more gender equal, but men will or women will watch men in movies, but men won't watch women in movies. And that's something that you hear a lot. It's a stupid thing, but that's what they will say a lot. So why does the Sphinx Theater Company care about this? Because they're trying to sell tickets. Okay, if we go strict economics, they're trying to sell tickets to women-centered stories and women-centered plays. Well, if you think that that won't make any money, then why is the Sphinx Theater Group around at all? And that doesn't even include the political reasons that they might have behind entering this debate and that sort of thing. That's just strict economics. All right, so you can have multiple answers to these questions, or you cannot have an answer to the question and wait until later to see what's going on. Okay. Are they part of a larger stakeholder position? Yeah, they're part of the critics of the Bechdel test. Okay, do they agree with another stakeholder? Yeah, they agree with those stakeholders I was talking about. That doesn't mean that I have to talk about all of these people. I'm just looking at one stakeholder as a way to kind of understand better this one perspective. Okay, are they oppositional or antagonistic? Okay, some people do work best in opposition, like they say somebody's wrong and that's where they work best. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad stakeholder position. It's because that opposition will often lead to a lot of not compromise, but will lead to a lot of change. All right, but it also forces the other side of this so if this is con, then it forces the pro side to kind of do a better job of making their case. Okay, so antagonistic oppositional stakeholders are fine. Just, are they? If they are, you want to know and you want to be able to say that and say why they're working against this. Okay, and then there's oppositional, and then there's, are they working against the widely held belief? Okay, we love to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King now, but at a time he was against the norm, and so he was working against the norm, so he was an oppositional stakeholder. Right? The norm was segregation, but he didn't agree with that. And then if you want to look even further within that stakeholder group, because again, if we're talking about this, you have the civil rights leaders, okay? But they weren't a unified group either, because you had more positions than this, but you had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So Malcolm was much more of a violent, he urged more violence, not the nonviolence that you had from Martin Luther King, but opposition through force, if necessary, okay? Well, we don't talk a ton about Malcolm X anymore. I don't know why, but that was an interesting stakeholder position, especially since he changed his position over time and became much more of a pacifist as time went on. But this is an interesting way to look at it. Are they working against a more widely held belief? Well, yeah. And even now, if we look back, Malcolm X was working against a more widely held belief of nonviolence. All right. What support can you find to back up these assertions? So don't just assume this. As you first start analyzing, yes, assume it. But then try to find evidence to help back that up. Okay. I just wanted to bring this up because this idea of understanding the rhetor is basically the characteristics, understanding the characteristics, and some understanding the rhetoric. Okay. So who's our rhetor for the Sphinx Theater Group? Well, we got this about, which is their history. We also have the artistic director, all these different groups here, okay? And if I want to know more, then I can just look these people up, right? Do a quick Google search, see if they've written anything or if they have any other claims, because especially if they're high up in the hierarchy, if they're changing the theater group to match what they think, then their opinion is going to be an important part of that stakeholder position. Okay. You can also look at our history and try to see what's going on. What I think is interesting is that if you look at this, our history, this part, it mentions a lot about accepting submitted manuscripts. So it's not really history. It's more about, how they work. So, don't just automatically throw something aside because it's labeled something. Take a look at it, see what they have to say. Because one thing that I might ask is, why did they label this our history? And then talk about the way that they operate. Okay. The other thing you might want to start doing, although this is something that you'll worry about more as the assignment goes along, is try to understand the audience. Who are they speaking to? Who are they trying to convince? Okay. You're not going to make an argument about a debate unless you're trying to convince somebody. Okay. Or you're trying to provoke somebody. So people will make arguments to try to provoke. If you think about for instance, the debates from earlier this week, if we think about Hillary Clinton, she made a lot of convincing arguments trying to convince the American public to kind of side with her, so they vote for her. But you also had her working to provoke at a different time in the debate, to provoke Donald Trump. Okay, and bringing up the Miss Universe winner that Trump called Miss Piggy. All right, that was a provocation of Trump. So who are they speaking to? She was speaking to Trump, trying to provoke him, and and at the same time trying to convince the American public that Trump is a misogynist, doesn't like women. And now all of a sudden I'm talking a lot about feminism. So I apologize about the theme of this lecture rather. When you talk about who are they speaking to, you can think about it in multiple different ways. It doesn't have to be they're speaking to one audience. They can speak to multiple audiences. But why? Why are they speaking to this group? Why are they speaking to this group? Okay. Why are they chosen this group? Okay. And then this is the bulk of the essay, but we'll get into this talking about it a little bit more. How do they appeal to the audience? Do they rely on ethos, pathos, logos? Okay. So to go back to Clinton, one of her big arguments is that she's got the demeanor to be president, and Trump does not. Well, if you look at the two of them side by side in that debate, she made a very convincing argument because her ethos, her credibility as a presidential-looking woman, is matched against Trump, who towards the end of that debate was a little tired and a little bit on the defensive, so he looked less presidential than you might expect someone to look. And so that idea of ethos or credibility, in that case, she won the argument. In terms of pathos, some people are arguing that she lost the argument in terms of emotion because hers was a very logical claim, but Trump is still winning the day in the idea that um, Clinton is an established politician. So this is remember, pathos is not just like happy, sad emotions, it's feeling and sentiment. And so something to look at. Do they allude to shared understanding or knowledge? Why? Okay. Do they have a sticky appeal? And all this is from one of the chapters in your book that we read earlier. Okay. The other thing to think about is the context in which this argument is being placed. Where is it being made? Is it web-based, print-based, or is it centered on events and protests? So the Sphinx Theater Group, if I'm looking at the web site, then that's web-based. But if I look at their performances as another text that needs to be rhetorically analyzed, then that's an event. If I'm looking at the Charlotte protest, that's a protest in the street. So it's looking at, or a speech, I'm looking at the event, and that's going to have different context behind it than web-based, because a web-based argument is going to be sharing screen time with Facebook and email and all this other stuff. So it needs to be more more provocative and catch your attention, and then hold that attention. Print-based is a little less worried, but it needs to be easily accessible for print-based, because a lot of people don't have access to newspapers or books as much these days, so you want to make sure that they can get to it if you want it to be an effective argument. And if it's centered on an event, you don't need to hold somebody's attention as much because they're already there, but you do need to work harder to get them active and moving. All right. So these are things to think about. And if you don't know, that's fine. Again, remember, this is a starting point. All right. So why would the writer choose this medium or this arena? That's another question. Why would they do that? What influence does news, history, popular culture have on this argument? How much influence? So for instance, if you think about the Colin Kaepernick kneel down protest that he's doing right now, that's very much centered in news of unarmed black men getting shot. It's also centered in a history of discrimination from the police. But he's also, and this isn't an illusion because he's not bringing it up, but it is influencing him. The ESPYs, there was a very poignant presentation by Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, I think Dwayne Wade, and Chris Paul, so 4 NBA superstars, where they spoke up about police violence and shooting of unarmed black men at the ESPYs, at the award show for sports run by ESPN. And there are a lot of people that think that opened the door for Kaepernick's protest. Okay, so knowing a little bit about the stuff that might be influencing your rhetoric or your rhetor, that's a good way to understand the context behind it. Okay, so if we look at the Sphinx Theater Group, one thing that I would definitely look at as far as context is to try to understand where they are as a group, as a theater company. All right, so this is the number of theaters in just a small section of London. Okay, so this is, I think it's the West End. I always get the neighborhoods confused, the modern neighborhoods confused, so I apologize if it's not. But you can see all these different theaters that are in just this area. Okay, so for instance, this is where Shakespeare would have been way back in the past. But so all these different theaters, and the Sphinx Theater Company is trying to compete with all these different other groups to try to get people to come see their plays. Why else put on a play if you don't want people to see it? So they're working in this context, this rich theater environment, which can help, but it also means they have to distinguish themselves. Okay, so that's something to consider. Also, and I'm not going to go too much into this because again, we'll get to this later, but you can also think about the constraints or what's constraining the argument, what's forcing it in. And this basically means social constraints. So for instance, does the rhetor evoke taboo topics or words? Why? Okay, so if I'm talking about the Bechdel test, for instance, there's no other way to do it than just say it. Dyke is a taboo word. Okay, it's a derogatory way to refer to lesbians, and the comic that the Bechdel test originated in is called Dykes You Should Know. Well, that's using that word. The title of that comic is using that word as a way to kind of provoke people to pay attention. All right, because this is a word we don't use that often. Okay, you can think about the N word as well as something that is provocative. Okay, some people think that it's lost a lot of its meaning because of the way it's been used in hip hop, but even now, if it's used in a public arena, the N word will raise a lot of attention, um, positive or negative. Same as the F word if in I always screw this up, LGBTQ um, contexts. So that these type of words are taboo. So if someone invokes that, then why? All right, and if they don't, then why are they being polite? Okay, now you can think about that in terms of polite or taboo, and you can also talk about like curse words. Why are they being polite? Why are they avoiding these things? That sort of thing. You can also talk about constraints in terms of genre. And remember, genre is not something complicated. I mean, it's treated like this big thing. But genre is just a way to understand how to group things, how to group arguments, how to group uh, rhetorical appeals, and that sort of stuff. So if I have a TV show, a sitcom, that's a genre. Right? You all know what a sitcom looks like. If you see a show on TV, you might think, "Oh, this is a good sitcom. This reminds me of Seinfeld or Friends or The Big Bang Theory or How I Met Your Mother or any number of sitcoms." All right. But if I look at a movie like a show like Atlanta, Donald Glover's new show on FX, that is still a sitcom because it's a situation comedy, but he is messing with the genre. He is working within the conventions of kind of the type of people or type of characters involved and that sort of thing. But he is breaking conventions as well in that he is, the pacing is not very fast. Okay, like most sitcoms, it's not focused on one or two locations like most sitcoms. Okay, so you have all these ways. So why does that sitcom break those rules? Why does it conform to those rules? Those are things to ask. Those are questions about the constraints. Okay, and does the rhetoric appeal to? Okay, so I talked about that. Anyways, so when we're looking at this, this can seem like something like this huge thing that you need to do. What I would encourage you to do is to go through or point by point and try to understand it a little bit better. And then look at those, when you ask these questions of the text and of the stakeholder, when you see a question that you don't understand or you think that's an interesting reason, that's something you want to delve into more. Okay, so for instance, the Sphinx Theater Company, their context is interesting as a way to understand why they're doing what they're doing, but I don't need to research more about it really. They work mainly within constraints. Other than casting of women, that's the only constraint that they kind of violate, and that they tend to prefer to cast more women than men in their productions. So I'm going to look at that, and I'm not going to talk about the genre constraints. I'm going to talk about casting constraints, or what is socially acceptable and what they're doing, or what is socially the norm and what they're doing, rather. All right. I'm going to look at them as a rhetor and talk about the things that are noteworthy about their interaction with the debate. I don't care about everything else, if it helps me understand their interaction with the debate. Okay, so ask yourself these questions about your stakeholder, and it should help you start kind of seeing where there are interesting things that you want to know more about. And if you want to know more about it, that's what you want to delve into. Okay, if you don't want to know anything about it, then take another look, or maybe look at a different stakeholder. Because if you have no curiosity, and if you think you completely understand this, then take another look. all right? Because there's always another level that you want to kind of delve into. And that's all analysis means. Rhetorical analysis means we're analyzing or questioning and trying to understand the rhetoric of this group. Stakeholder analysis, we're questioning, trying to understand the stakeholder. So analysis it sounds like this big thing, but really you're just trying to ask questions and find answers to understand something better. And the goal of this essay is that you ask questions of your stakeholders' text as a way to understand better where this stakeholder is coming from and what they are saying and how they are saying it. Okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. Next week, I'm going to talk about looking at argumentation and looking at claims, because all of this is a way to understand the situation. But what you also want to do is understand the claims that are being made and how they're being made. All right, so we're going to talk about that next week. So have a good weekend and take care, and I will see you guys around, I guess. Take care.